the government sees it. Now, Albert Power's heroism at Foster's Farm is exactly why the medal was created. Let's explore his history more. And this is Albert Power. He was born in Liberty, Ohio, June 18, 1842, immigrated to Iowa, settled in at Bloomfield, Iowa, and he was a farmer in the antebellum days. He will eventually enlist in the 3rd Iowa Cavalry, Army of the Southwest, under General Samuel Ryan Curtis. Now, at Pea Ridge, and we've got a map here to try to articulate exactly, there was a, Cora was asking, are we going to show folks where they received the Medal of Honor? This map delineates that for you. Up here, on March 7th, 1862, that day was a Friday, 163 plus years ago now, Benjamin McCullough will run into Union Colonel Peter J. Osterhaus. Osterhaus had been sent over there with 600 men, a single battery, and he was to find out what all the hubbub was about very large reports of Confederate soldiers essentially in the rear of the Union Army. Now, Benjamin McCullough is one of 2 division commanders in the Army of the West under Earl Van Dorn. He had more than 7,000 men. And so right up here at Leetown, Leetown's tour stop 4 is to go around the battlefield. McCullough and Osterhaus and our good friend Albert Power is under Osterhaus will collide. Now, you probably have already figured it out. Most of you know the battlefield pretty well, so I'm not telling you anything new. You already know this. Several of you know that, of course, the Confederates, just being so overwhelming in numbers, will sweep these fields north of Overson's Field here and force the Union Army back. But at one point, Albert Power was surrounded and nearly surrounded, and one of his comrades was almost captured, and he spurred his horse on, picked his fellow comrade up and rescued him, and then took him to safety, all the while being exposed to small arms fire along the way. So this is the feat that Albert Power was awarded, because he was nominated for the Medal of Honor. And kind of interesting, he will get that later on. We'll tell you more about that. And I'm just curious, what do you think drives an individual to selflessness like this? What goes through your mind with this terribly impressive feat that Albert Power performed? Compassion, okay. How about camaraderie? How about common effort? Common background, and then also having connected with fellow soldiers and going through training and that kind of thing. How does Power's actions reflect the concept of duty? Was that his duty? Well, I think it's above and beyond the call of duty. It's not necessarily his duty. So hence the reason why he was nominated and received the Medal of Honor.
His duty was to escape. Right?
Yeah. What qualities make Power's actions courageous? That should hit you over the top of the head. That's pretty easy to, all the while being exposed to enemy fire, you pick up your comrade and take him to safety on horseback. Now, Albert Power will stay in the Army, in fact, rise to become first sergeant. He'll return after the war back to Bloomfield, Iowa, and settle in there and become a farmer. He'll also be a county commissioner, too, as well, for a number of years. And he will die there in Bloomfield, Iowa, and he is buried today at the Oddfellows Cemetery in Bloomfield, Iowa. One interesting thing, if you don't know this, and I just thought this was kind of cool, so I wanted to put it into the program, is that his grandson, George Wilson Power, was a West Point graduate, in fact, 1932. And then in the Pacific, under MacArthur, he commanded the 247th Artillery under MacArthur. And he won the Bronze Star. So apparently the apple didn't fall too far from the cart when it came to his grandfather and his grandson. And I tried to find a photo. I couldn't find a photo of his grandson. You would think that if he rose to become a general, which he did, there would be some kind of photo, but I couldn't find a photo of Wilson Power. What officer at Pea Ridge provided secret aid to Mexican President Benito Juarez? Anybody know by chance? This is Benito Juarez here.
Confederate or Union?
Well, it definitely, well, most likely be Union.
Okay.
But it's our next guy, Francis J. Herron. Francis J. Herron was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He attended what became Pitt University. He then immigrated out to Iowa, settled in at Dubuque in the antebellum days, became a banker. He and his brothers operated a bank. Eventually, he will help organize a unit and be the first Union unit from Iowa to be offered to the Union cause directly to President Abraham Lincoln. So that's really kind of cool. He also gets a unique designation or task when we get down to Vicksburg too as well. And I'll tell you more about that in just a few moments. So he'll be promoted to Colonel of the 9th Iowa. And at Pea Ridge, in fact, Francis J. Herron was involved in 2 different forced marches during the war. One, definitely no one or few know about, and that was his forced march from Huntsville, Arkansas over to Pea Ridge, a distance of 42 miles in 16 hours, which he brought off, and by the way, went directly into battle too as well at Pea Ridge. And the other one was later on in the war, same year, different month, at Prairie Grove, December 7th, 1862. And there he marched his men in 3 days, 120 miles, to get down to provide succor and sustenance to James Gordon Blunt down at Prairie Grove later on in the war. But he and his men were associated with 2 great forced marches. I think the first one from Huntsville to Pea Ridge is every bit as impressive, especially when you consider he went directly into battle, but the same thing down to Prairie Grove too, essentially. So very impressive. Now at Elkhorn Tavern on March 7th, 1862, while commanding his unit there, he will be topple off his horse, get pinned underneath his horse, break his leg. He'll get captured, but he had several stern defenses there in fighting delaying efforts to allow Union General Samuel Ryan Curtis to get up additional reinforcements and artillery to come to Eugene Asa Neal Carr and Grenville Dodge's aid. Herron eventually, and I have always thought this is kind of interesting, he would be exchanged because he will serve as a prisoner of war for a few months. And oddly enough, he was exchanged for the same officer, Confederate officer, at Pea Ridge, and that was Colonel Louis Hebert. I just found it kind of interesting that those 2 were specifically involved in the exchange. It was not always the case with prisoners of war like that. He was nominated for the Medal of Honor, and it was his citation was foremost in leading his men and rallying them to repeated acts of daring until himself disabled and taken prisoner, end quote. That's his citation. The first 2 guys here obviously are from Iowa. The other 2 are from Illinois. Herron's career continued. Here's a good question. Could you have been motivated to act like Herron? My best answer is I don't know. Never been in the military. I always laugh when I hear somebody, oh yeah, you darn tootin' I can do that.
I can guarantee I wouldn't have it.
Yeah, I don't know. My best answer is I don't know. I don't know. I can do amazing things when I set my mind to it. Most people can, though. Really can. How does the Medal of Honor reflect the concept of duty as related to Heron? He was given a task to hold that area right there at Elkhorn Tavern. Earl Van Dorn and the Confederate Army of the West had several stern attacks there trying to move him off his position there. It's the very essence of why we have the Medal of Honor, above and beyond the call of duty. All right? So Heron, after P. Ridge, will be commissioned brigadier general by his friend, Samuel Kirkwood. This is Iowa Governor Samuel Kirkwood. Kirkwood was one of those terribly bright and brilliant governors, northern governors, that really aided the Lincoln administration during the war. And in fact, Kirkwood was one of the very, very best out of the several northern governors overall. With that, Heron's going to be drawn into a foot race and a fight. The foot race happened first, and then the fight after that again. He's going to march 120 miles in 3 days from near Springfield, Missouri, and from there all the way down to and out to Prairie Grove to come to the aid of fellow Union General James Gordon Blunt. All right, these men literally took off their shoes and stained the very landscape that they walked with their blood. All right, to get down there. This is one of the great forced marches of the war, too, as well, that no one knows about, unless you're Bill Shea or my audience members. Most of you know. Yes, I know. You know. All right. So in fact, this is a challenging program because you guys know what you know. So it's challenging for me. All right. Now, so we got the foot race. That's happened. They arrived exhausted with bloody feet, and they will go directly into battle. And the unit that he will send in first will be the 37th Illinois. They will make 3 attacks and push to the rear of the Borden House. They fired 3 shots and then retreated from there. The Union Army will win this battle. If you really ask me, I say it's really tactically a draw. But at the conclusion, the Confederate Army under Thomas Carmichael Hyman left the field, and the Union Army is given credit for winning. But there was a ruse there, too, between Francis J. Heron, the guy we're talking about now, and Marmaduke, one of the cavalry officers. Marmaduke, John Sappington Marmaduke, was trying to pull a ruse so that the Confederate Army could retreat, and they did. He pulled it off. So, promoted, 26 years of age, Major General in the Union Army. Anybody know what salary was at that time in 1862 of a Major General? In 1862, it was $5,000. Can you believe that? $5,000. Wow. Heron's career in the Civil War will continue. In fact, he'll be stationed. He'll be sent back into Vicksburg, and he and his men will be sent here, Army of the Frontier 2nd and 3rd Divisions, to Vicksburg on the extreme left flank of the Union Army at Vicksburg. In this area, it wasn't nearly as much fighting as it was up here in the northern sections of Vicksburg. So it went well at Vicksburg. Of course, the Confederates capitulated there. I mentioned earlier that he had this distinction at Vicksburg. U.S. Grant gave him this distinction. In fact, there were 2 officers that were allowed to go in and receive the city at Vicksburg, and our guy here, Francis J. Heron, was one of those. The other one was James McPherson. Those 2 officers, so rightfully respected, so much so by U.S. Grant. Now, then Army of the Frontier 2nd and 3rd Divisions are going to be sent to Brownsville, Texas, and it's right on the border in Texas. And he's going to be involved in some diplomatic matters there. In fact, the French had occupied Mexican soil there, and President Abraham Lincoln thought that this was a violation of the Monroe Doctrine, and that was the reason why Army of the Frontier 2nd and 3rd Divisions under Francis J. Herron were sent there. And it was a secret mission. It was not well known, and he will also be able to extricate several diplomats and then very large amount of cash too that diplomats were using there in Mexico too. But he did provide secret aid to Benito Juarez in the Mexican Revolution down there too as well. Significant because a lot of people don't know about it. It's not widely known. Again, it's based on this interpretation by President Abraham Lincoln of it being a violation of the Monroe Doctrine. Now, Herron's career will go on and continue. In fact, he will breach the center of the line at Fort Blakely later on toward the close of the war. And then he will also negotiate the surrender of all Trans-Mississippi forces too as well. That's a not so well common known thing too as well. And he married this woman here not too long afterwards. Her name was Adelaide Winbray Sophia Flash. And by all accounts, she was a vivacious, beautiful New Orleans socialite, and he had the good fortune of marrying her. One thing about these men of the mid-19th century that they did well, and U.S. Grant is another example of these people, is that he married well, shall we say, all right? He married well. Into the postbellum years after the war, he's going to be immersed in state politics in Louisiana. In fact, he was an attorney, tax collector, secretary of state, and U.S. Marshal. The corrupt governor of Louisiana had accused him, namely to throw off the scent of his own corruption, but he fingered Herron, and Herron for the rest of his life, in fact, military circles too as well, will have this black mark of corruption. It wasn't true, it's not true, but the governor at the time who appointed him initially, Secretary of State, had put out a number of bad remarks about Herron and his corruption, but it wasn't true. Now, eventually, he's going to, in 1877, he immigrated to New York City, and he will immerse himself in terms of being a noted attorney, also the Grand Army of the Republic, and then the Loyal Legion. These are two veterans organizations that existed at the close of the Civil War and into the postbellum years. He will die there. He'll be buried in the Cavalry Cemetery of Queens, New York. Now, Herron, there's an interesting thing. By chance, anybody own the 2-volume set, Union Generals in blue and Confederate Generals in gray? One of the sad things about that, and I've owned that 2-volume set, and it's been a great reference set for years, but I mention it because there's a totally false comment in there about Herron that he had died a penniless pauper in a tenement, New York City apartment tenement, and it's not true. In fact, primary records show that he was thriving as an attorney and that kind of thing, but simply because one historian put that out there, everyone henceforth has perpetuated that myth. It's strange how these kinds of things get perpetuated over time. One thing that I would like you to know is that his contributions in terms of soldier or general from Iowa are second to only Samuel Ryan Curtis. And one of the interesting things about this, in the postbellum years, the state of Iowa came late in terms of erecting a monument to Herron. It was only after there was a huge public protest in unrest about it that the state finally came to the conclusion that there needed to be some sort of monument to honor him at the Capitol. But they grudgingly did. Now, I haven't been there, but I've seen photographs of it. It's actually pretty cool. One officer at Pea Ridge was personal friends with Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill Cody. You didn't notice that I put the transitions from one slide into the program there, did you? Well, it's our next guy, Eugene Asa Neal Carr. All right, Carr was born in Concord, New York, March 10, 1830. He was a very bright man. In fact, he entered West Point at 16. Now, you can only enter West Point. I don't know what the age requirement is now, but I know at the time of the Civil War it was 15. So he was barely old enough to even enter. He'll go on to Carlisle Cavalry School, and then he'll have a number of frontier duty outposts in the Midwest, and also in Indian Territory too as well. But he would be a rising star coming out of that frontier duty. He cast his lot when the war came with the Union Army, and he was assigned as an officer under Samuel Ryan Curtis or in the Army of the Southwest, but at Wilson's Creek he had good service as he was breveted there on that battlefield. But he'll be the 4th Division commander when we get down to Pea Ridge. And it's this guy right here. That's what he looks like. This is Samuel Ryan Curtis up here. For those who do not know, this is the raid house at Wilson's Creek, a key point on the battlefield. Now, at Pea Ridge, of course, what's going to occur is Samuel Ryan Curtis and the Army of the Southwest, it's not on the map here, but it's down here in this direction here, a little bit further south on the northern bluffs of Little Sugar Creek. The entire Union Army were amassed there with fortifications. In fact, it's tour stop 11. The general public doesn't normally go down there, but you can if you want to. I would recommend good shoes and be aware of rocky, jagged, uneven ground and a pretty good hill to get up to as well. So just be careful. The order was to go from Carr and his men and the other Union officers will have to turn and wheel about and send men over here to Leetown, over here in this area, and then also up here at Elkhorn Tavern in this area. And you have to remember Earl Van Dorn had swung around behind in this 8-mile flanking maneuver using the local road systems in general direction, just the way I'm pointing out here, to come in and behind the Union Army. Difficult thing here to turn 180 degrees and then feed men and material to 2 different places. Tour stop 4, or what is tour stop 4 today, Leetown, and Elkhorn Tavern, which is tour stop 8 today. And Samuel Ryan Curtis, his commanding officer of the Union Army, gave him an order to clean out that holler. All right? And so Carr will be accompanied by Colonel Grenville Dodge. And Carr will front Van Dorn here at Elkhorn Tavern, and then Dodge will be sent down Huntsville Road. This is Huntsville Road right here. And he will fight a delaying effort because Earl Van Dorn had asked Sterling Price to swing around and create this flanking maneuver out here in Clemens Field. And then Van Dorn would front Carr and the Union Army here. What's going to occur, and a short story here, is out here in Clemens Field, if you've walked that, there's a piece of ground there, considerable piece of ground, and it's uneven. And it wreaked havoc on Sterling Price and the Missouri State Guard to be able to make an attack on Grenville Dodge, moving from the east to the west in this direction. So from the east here to the west toward Elkhorn Tavern. There's so many Confederates out there, eventually Dodge, although he did have 3 horses shot out from underneath him and broke 3 ribs, and fought a really good delaying effort. Just too many Confederates out there, they had to give way, and then the Union Army retreated back to Elkhorn Tavern, and then eventually back to Ruddock's Field. But Carr and Dodge had bought 11 critical hours that essentially saved the Union Army. Dodge also, if you look at him, he had bought 5 critical hours for the Union Army overall too as well, because he and his men had went out in 2 different locations and felled trees to block the advance of the Confederate Army using that local road system, and also conducting that 8-mile flanking maneuver to come in and behind the Union Army. All right. Now, this is a citation that I received because he was nominated for the Medal of Honor, and I quote, directed the deployment of his command and held his ground under a brisk fire of shot and shell in which he was several times wounded. Folks, several times meant the right part of the neck, the right shoulder, and the right leg. 3 different places. Colonel Eugene Asa Neal Carr was wounded in the fighting, facing off essentially he and Earl Van Dorn right here at Elkhorn Tavern. Find any inspiration in Carr's service here on the battlefield?
Very inspirational.
Yeah. How about courageous? Anything courageous about that?
Going went to Olympic.
Yeah. Anything that would warrant that Medal of Honor?
Yeah.
It's the very reason why Congress and the government established the Medal of Honor, is it not? Above and beyond the call of duty. All right? Above and beyond the call of duty. All right? His career in the Civil War went along more so. In fact, he'll play, I love this photo of him here. For a general, it just looks like he's very much so ill at ease there. But in the Vicksburg campaign, he played an indelible role. You'll recall that the Vicksburg campaign was a 98-day campaign, U.S. grant, fought 5 major battles, marched 217 miles, won all 5 major battles, and then eventually descended upon Vicksburg. The 2 failed attacks on May 19th, May 22nd, 1863, and then the more than 4,000 casualties that occurred there on those 2 days. Then U.S. Grant decided to conduct siege operations, and then from there, 47 days later, Confederates capitulated, and it was over, and Vicksburg was surrendered on July 4, 1863. Some of the battles that he played primary roles in the Vicksburg campaign were Big Black River Bridge, Champions Hill, and then also the Siege of Vicksburg too as well. All 3 of those. It was only Raymond and Jackson that he didn't play some sort of major primary role in the outcome of the battle. You could also throw in another officer that, and we mentioned him earlier. His name was Colonel, now it's General Peter J. Osterhaus too as well. And in fact, it would be Carr and Osterhaus who worked marvelously well together at Fort Gibson, but also at Big Black River Bridge and at Champions Hill too as well. So he is a rising star in the Union Army at this point with his service. Now, he'll go on and he'll distinguish himself at Fort Blakely, piercing the center of the Confederate line in less than 20 minutes. And as an end result of that, President Abraham Lincoln promoted him. And then he'll be involved in a very unique thing in the impeachment crisis. You know, the radical Republicans were adamant that they impeach now President Andrew Johnson. This is Andrew Johnson up here, and this is Edward M. Stanton here, obviously, and Lincoln. Lincoln had been assassinated by this point. These 2 men did not get along and did not see things well, Stanton and Johnson. And in fact, in the impeachment crisis, Stanton had called for any available officer to go and protect the National Archives, the government buildings, and that kind of thing. And for 80 days, Eugene Asa Neal Carr was in the service of protecting the National Archives in Washington, D.C., believe it or not. It's a true story. All right, now, eventually here, he's going to marry Mary Maguire, and they will have one son. The next 2 decades, he's going to stay in the Army, and he's going to fight Native Americans on the plains, on the Great Plains. And in fact, he'll have such great success fighting Native Americans on the plains that the states of Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado will vote resolutions of thanks to Carr. So this was a pretty big deal. It's sort of similar to the Confederate government because you couldn't win a medal in fighting in the Confederate Army, but you could get the thanks of the Confederate Congress. So somewhat similar there. In fighting out here along the plains, Carr will become really good friends with scouts that he entertained. In fact, James Wild Bill Hickok and William F. Buffalo Bill Cody are two examples of folks that he befriended, and they continued to be friends, lifelong friends, even after his military career was over. These guys eventually will invite him there's this terribly impressive scene of Madison Square Garden where Buffalo Bill Cody was there, and they asked Carr to come, and Carr witnessed what went on there, and it was just kind of cool because as friends they stayed in contact and even traveled the country going to events with these two men, Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill Cody. Now Carr will retire in 1893 in Washington, D.C. He'll immerse himself in the things of Washington, D.C. With the military groups. The Grand Army of the Republic is an example of one of those. He'll receive his Medal of Honor in 1894. And I meant to mention earlier, and I forgot, Power, our first guy, he was awarded the Medal of Honor several years later, and that was typical during the Civil War. These guys, 20, 30 years later, would receive these medals. Interestingly enough, Power, and I just wanted to mention this because I think it's interesting, he will be sitting on his front porch in Bloomfield, Iowa, and through registered mail, his Medal of Honor showed up. The United States Army awarded it, believe it or not, in the postbellum years via registered mail. I thought that was kind of interesting. He will die in December 1910. One thing that's not well known, that he was buried at West Point with full military honors. And so if you ever get to go to West Point, perhaps you'll go check his grave out. What soldier provided legal counsel for the Haymarket Square rioters? Well, our last guy in the program here, William Perkins Black. All right, he was born in Kentucky. At one point, his mother, Josephine Black, her husband had died, and with that, from Mississippi, they immigrated to Illinois to be near family members. And there they'll settle in at Danville, Illinois. Believe it or not, has anybody seen that show, Coach? Remember Luther on there, the actor that played Luther? He was from Danville, Illinois. That guy was, believe it or not. But and another interesting thing about Danville is the Black brothers, William Perkins Black and John Charles Black, their stepfather, because Josephine Black, their mother, remarried. Their stepfather was William Fithigan, and he was a doctor, all right? And he was personal friends with Abraham Lincoln. And in fact, they had both served in the Illinois state legislature in the antebellum years and stayed lifelong friends all the way until Lincoln was assassinated. And in the antebellum years, made several speeches off the small balcony of the Black family home in Danville, Illinois. And another thing that's not widely known is that William Perkins Black and John Charles Black, two brothers, and 4 different sets of brothers, awarded the Medal of Honor during the Civil War, and 6 overall awarded the Medal of Honor in the history of the medal itself. They were both wounded at William at Pea Ridge, John Charles at Prairie Grove, and Dr. William Fithian, that personal friend of Abraham Lincoln, made that trek down from Illinois to treat the wounded at Pea Ridge and at Prairie Grove. So it was, oddly enough, a personal friend, President Abraham Lincoln, that saw to the wounded on both battlefields. I just put that in the medical talk, so I had to get that in. I thought it's way cool beans. Now, early on in his youth, Black will attend Wabash College in Crawfordsville, Indiana. He actually wanted to be a minister. The war came, and eventually he'll join a different unit, but at first he joined the 11th Indiana, and he had the good fortune of seeing the elephant. That means that he had combat in West Virginia early on in the war, and then with that, he eventually joined and was commissioned lieutenant of the 37th Illinois Company K. And eventually, by the time of Pea Ridge, he'll be promoted captain. And he will have pretty good service at Pea Ridge. All right. At Pea Ridge, he single-handedly took out a Colt repeating rifle. That's the only repeating rifle on our battlefield. A 5-shooter. And everyone knows the history of that. If you maintain those rifles, they function pretty well. But if you don't maintain and clean it, all 5 rounds can go off, and they did oftentimes, in soldiers' faces. William Perkins Black took that rifle and single-handedly, in this area right here, stopped in its tracks this infantry assault by Louis Hebert, Colonel Louis Hebert in the Confederate Army here, and prevented the 2nd Ohio Light Artillery Unit from being captured by Confederates on that area of the battlefield. And in so doing was wounded in the left side. It was a rather nasty wound. And that stepdad, Dr. William Fithian, will play a primary role in treating Black there. What do you think motivates somebody to risk everything in combat like this? It's hard to understand what goes through their mind, but just trying to open a dialogue here.
Anger, maybe? Guts?
Yeah, maybe fire in the belly for your mission. Also duty, also your country, How does Black and his service symbolize dedication to his mission? I think determination is a key word there. He was adamant that the Confederate Army under Colonel Louis Hebert was not going to capture that battle, the 2nd Ohio Light Artillery. Now, eventually, into the postbellum years, he will marry Hortensia. I've never seen that first name before, so I had to put it on there because there's no way I could remember that. Hortensia McGreal of Galveston, Texas in May 1869. And of course, he became a lawyer, not a minister in the postbellum years. But believe it or not just William Perkins Black, but his brother, John Charles Black, was also an attorney too as well. And so I've wondered about that with John Charles too, because if you don't know this, John Charles was wounded in one arm at Pea Ridge and at Prairie Grove, wounded in the other arm, and in fact still nursing the same arm from Pea Ridge, because Pea Ridge down to Prairie Grove is only marched down to December 1862, so only separated by a few months. And then into the postbellum years, because he never regained the full use of one of his arms, I can just in my mind picture him studying and trying to become, past the bar. If he only had one arm, it might make things a little more difficult. He will defend as an attorney because he thought that the Haymarket Square Riders ought to have due process and ought to have their constitutional rights appreciated. We've learned a little bit about that in recent days, haven't we? With folks' due process not being appreciated and their rights, constitutional rights being appreciated, because according to the Constitution, and yes, I have read it, it does say that no matter who is here, they have a right to due process, all right? But he argued successfully to the United States Supreme Court with this case. Of course, he lost, and eventually these conspirators were executed, but you have to really hand it to him for just very strong character, seeing to it that these folks receive due process and that kind of thing, and defended constitutional principles. Now, one interesting thing about William Perkins Black is that he also immersed himself in politics. Initially, he was a Republican. He couldn't get elected as a Republican in the postbellum years, so as it was a common thing to do, he switched parties, and he ran again, unsuccessfully again, for Congress. He ran 3 times, believe it or not, and all 3 times lost. Then he continued to immerse himself in the Grand Army of the Republic. His wife passed, and he passed, and he was buried at Graceland Cemetery. He is a key person because I think he's a person that we should admire, namely because of defending those rioters and making sure that they at least had due process. It was not popular to do so. It's a very strong character on the part of Black. Now, his brother, the other brother, John Charles Black, ran for Congress too, and he was elected to Congress. So it's rather interesting there. And we are at that moment where we're going to wrap up the program, and you see Jack has made a return there. Strange how that is. But now, President Abraham Lincoln had a famous quote, and it really speaks to why we really need heroes in this country, why we need to appreciate courage, sacrifice, and the selflessness of Medal of Honor recipients. And it's because of what Lincoln said, and I quote, "A nation that does not honor its heroes will not long endure," end quote. And I like that, namely for 2 reasons. Number one, it's by somebody from the time period, but more importantly, it's a key person from the time period too as well. And it also speaks to exactly what we're talking about, this courage, sacrifice, and selflessness on the part of Medal of Honor recipients, right? In fact, recipients embody the highest ideals of our military and our country overall. Today, we honor them, and we should. In my view, we don't do nearly as good a job as we should. I'd like to end here with something that Winston Churchill said. Yes, I know, not from the time period, but I think his words will resonate with you. And Churchill said, and I quote, "Never before in human conflict was so much owed to so few," end quote. Boy, did he ever get it right in terms of, and yes, I know he wasn't referring to Medal of Honor recipients, but I think that this is a good quote to refer to in mentioning Medal of Honor recipients. Now, with this, these 4 recipients, did anything inspire you this evening? Their circumstances, their travails, their sacrifices, their selflessness, their courage.
Can we revisit Mr. Black for a second?
Yeah.
And the repeating rifle?
Yeah,
Was it a lever action with bullets rather than a black
It was a
powder
revolving
thing?
rifle.
yeah.
It was a revolving rifle.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
no wonder it's a revolving. Okay.
Colt revolving.
Yeah, and-
Did I say repeating?
No.
Oh, okay,
Oh, I'm
Colt
sorry.
revolving
I
rifle.
thought I
Yeah.
heard repeat.
All right.
Anyway, so
They did.
a 5-shot revolver rifle, and single-handedly he held back that whole group of Confederates?
Yeah.
He didn't have the other guys fire with him?
Well, he had others, but he played a
That
key
weapon
role
was-
in that.
That weapon was the one that.
And that's from his citation too as
Yeah,
well.
that's it. I just wanted to put, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's
Was
what they
he
look like.
injured already?
That I would have to double check on that. You're talking about his left side? I don't think so. I think it's in the fight. He was actually stabbed by an officer in the Confederate Army. So I think it was as the fight continued, but I don't think he was wounded at that point. No.
How can we be more like these guys without, the stabbing and the shooting?
Well, that's a good point, and like those character traits too. I think, and I know a lot of people in this group because I know most of these people personally. They know that I like high character people, and and especially courage and sacrifice and selflessness. These are things that we should really support and admire and try to emulate. At least I think anyway.
I agree.
Joe?
Do you think Dodge should have gotten a medal?
I do, and not only that, Colonel Grenville Dodge from our battle, and Dodge is one of my favorites, and you know that, Joe. And I did a program in the past on Dodge for the park, and yes, I do. 3 horses shot out from underneath him, broke 3 ribs, helped by 11 hours out there in Clemens Field to block the advance of Sterling Price and the Missouri State Guard. I definitely, without a doubt, think he does. Here's the deal with Dodge, though. Dodge and a lot of men at the mid-19th century did a lot of this. He never saw a situation where he didn't take advantage to promote himself, if you get my drift. But a lot of people did that. But you can't argue with his war record. The funny thing that I think of with Grenville Dodge, though, and it's a true story, is later on in the war, in the Atlanta campaign, he gets in a real spat with General Thomas Sweeney, a fellow Union soldier, who was a one-armed general. And in fact, Sweeney had lost an arm in the previous war, Mexican-American War. And the one-armed general nearly whooped his butt. So I've always thought that was rather kind of funny.
He disobeyed orders, and when he was supposed to be down there at Little Sugar Creek.
On the northern bluffs.
He disobeyed orders and
He
brought
had
his
already
people
pulled
up
his
to
men
the
out.
fight. And so I suspect that's another reason that he didn't get the medal of honor for disobeying orders.
Yeah, and you have to remember too, Dodge in the postbellum years, he had become immersed in in building the Transcontinental Railroad. In fact, he was the chief engineer, so he had left the Union Army, namely because he'd make so much more money as opposed to a major general in the Union Army. But I'm currently working on a program on Dodge that's really fascinating because there's a master's thesis that I've been able to get that takes on not his overall military career, but his efforts as an espionage person. And boy, it's really fascinating because I knew that the Union Army were meeting out as much as $5,000 per month to get information from spies. But his efforts, and you have to remember in the military, the espionage was really in its embryonic stanzas at that point. And so if you had entered his headquarters, this is Dodge, in the Vicksburg campaign, you would have seen all these things plastered on walls and things like that. And there was all kinds of secrecy, and he used primarily women and children, believe it or not, to get information. But I'm working on that now, and I was going to let everyone know I'm excited. I've received, I'm going to be able to publish an article on this very program with the Arkansas Historical Quarterly by the same title, so I'm really excited about that. But I'm also working on a program on Dodge and his espionage efforts, because he was a railroad builder and espionage officer for Grant in the Vicksburg campaign during the war. Wow.
There's a story about the Black Brothers that I kind of like. I understand Nicolay, who was Lincoln's secretary, they received a letter that incorrectly said both black brothers had been killed. And Nicolay said it was the only time he ever saw Abraham Lincoln cry.
I remember reading that, and I didn't recall that, but
they were-
I've read that too as well. That's a pretty cool
must have
story.
grown up.
Yeah, he liked those boys because he had, again, in the antebellum days, had made speeches from their home in Danville, Illinois, and got to know them pretty well. So, but, I was at Prairie Grove in December, and I talked about Dr. Fithian there too as well. So I thought that was kind of cool because you have ties to the battlefield. Yeah, Jim.
I was gonna mention to you, Fayetteville history, but Jerry, you probably know this. The Polson House sat on the corner, more or less Arkansas and Dixon. That was where John C. was kept, and Dr. Fithian, they stayed there for like 2+ months.
Oh, wow, I didn't
Just
know
right there in
that.
the corner. The house is obviously gone, the Dixon Street bookstores there.
I'd like to have more information about that.
Campus bookstores there
Oh.
now. But Alan Thompson actually did the research to find out that's where he actually was after Prairie Grove. But Dr. Fithian literally lived in Fayetteville for a time when he nursed him back to health.
I was not aware of that. That's pretty way cool thing. I could
That's
see
an
Alan.
That's an Alan.
Yeah, because Alan's pretty sharp. Yeah, I could see him knowing that.
Miss Outlet.
Medal of Honor recipient buried here in Washington County,
Oh, okay. What's his name?
Samuel Johnson.
Oh, yeah, I think you've told me about him in the past.
Yeah, he's buried out there in a Baker Cemetery in West Fork. And it's got a nice little, very nice stone out there.
Huh.
And it's just a very small cemetery, isn't gonna be bigger than this.
Did
one.
you and the Sons of Union Veterans play a primary role in cleaning or doing any maintenance with that? No? Oh, okay.
We have
I thought you
Sergeant
might.
Adler in Benton County at the G.R. Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
What's our post
Medal of
office?
Honor.
Clarence, what's his name? He doesn't know a lot.
Samuel Johnson Stone,
The
his
post
gold
office
trim,
here.
trim in the.
Oh,
Our post office here is named after Medal of Honor winner, isn't it? Clarence, what's his name? He's buried at the National Cemetery.
Claire, what's the last name?
Craft, maybe? The post office on
Yeah, I know where the post office is. I just
not
don't
the
remember.
remember the one on Joyce or whatever.
Because I'm thinking of Leroy
Clarence Pratt,
Pond,
that's his name,
or,
Clarence Pratt.
but Pond wasn't a Medal of Honor. He won every other medal, but saved the Medal of Honor. But Charlie Britt, that's another guy he was a Medal of Honor U of A graduate too as well. He was from Arkansas too as well.
Oh, footsie bread?
Footsie Britt.
Footsie Britt.
Yeah,
Did he get the Medal of Honor?
yeah, that was his nickname or nom de
Yeah,
guerre.
he was a football player up here at U of A.
Yeah, yeah. Leroy Pond was in Patton's Third Army and was a heck of a soldier too as well.
Oh, Leroy Pine?
Yeah.
Don't get me going on that one.
Yeah.
The renaming of Leroy Pine drives, still drives me crazy.
All right, folks, that's the program. Are there any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. There's-
It was 4 of us that were down there 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Here's one more joke.
Hello.
How did some soldiers win the Medal of Honor without fighting? By staying awake during one of General George McClellan's strategy meetings. I like that one. So, to me, that's a funny one.
Yeah,
That's very good.
So I think that's it. I think that's all. Oh, here's one. Why did I already tell you that? I can't remember. Why did the soldier refuse the Medal of Honor? Because he was already outstanding in his field.
Oh, yeah. You have to lay now.
Crash and burn, burn and crash.
On average, how far did these soldiers walk during one?
Well, depending on
year?
what unit and what theater they were in, but it was very common, march 20, 30 miles a day. You just think about the shoes. The shoes were called brogans, and brogans were wood soles, leather on top, and then wood pegs to keep it all together. And they would wear out in no time. You have to also remember they carried anywhere from 40 to 60 pounds. H2 as well, and all wool uniforms, even in the summer. This is the Victorian H2, so all the way up to the top. Several of these guys are reenactors. They can tell you all about that in terms of uniforms. But yeah, those shoes wore out pretty quickly.
They came up with something new for making all of those shoes. They called it shoe sizes. And basically, it's the same, we're using a variation of what they were using then.
Wow.
Yeah, I was going to tell you, we were talking about boys, and I'm gathering materials right now to do a program on boys in the Civil War. And I was just at Kirksey Middle School last week. I had 5 hours and 45 minutes, 294 kids during that time. So it was back to back to back to back to back. But I was talking about the common soldiers, but it was kind of interesting because it was very common boys would join the military, and there were requirements age-wise, and I think it was 18 to start. You had to be. If not, you had to get your parents' permission. But they would take a piece of paper, write 18 in it, put it in their shoe, and then put the shoe on, and then if prompted by the mustering officer, they would say, "I indeed, sir, stand over 18." I'll leave you on this one. It's a great story. Leave you on this one. 14-year-old boy. His name was Orion Perseus Howe, Howe. And I told this because these are 8th graders. So these kids are 14, but this is a true story. He was a 14-year-old boy. That's their age, 8th graders. Howe was in the 55th Illinois, and he was charged on May 19th, 1863, with going to get the needed cartridges for his unit, and began to walk. Walk became trot, trot became a run, and he was hit and went down. He was shot in the left leg. He refused to be carried from the field until he had a chance to report to General William Tecumseh Sherman's headquarters for those needed cartridges for his unit. U.S. Grant and Sherman found out about it, and they made sure that boy was awarded the Medal of Honor at 14. Wow. And his story continues just a little bit more into the postbellum years. U.S. Grant now President U.S. Grant, made sure that he got an appointment to the Naval Academy. He flunked out, didn't make the grades, immigrated to New York City, studied to become a dentist, and then from there, he went through all that training. He immigrated out to Southwest Missouri, Springfield, Missouri, and there he was the town dentist for many years, and he's buried in the National Cemetery there at Springfield, Missouri. But that's the story of Orion, O-R-I-O-N, Perseus, P-E-R-S-E-U-S, Howe, H-O-W-E.
Was he the youngest?
He was born during the meteor shower.
He is the youngest recipient of the Medal of Honor, if I remember correctly, but I'd have to verify that.
Gotta have the coolest name.
And there was a boy that was as young as 9 years old that was in the service, believe it or not. So, and then
Does
you have,
anybody want to know why Samuel Johnson got his medal?
what did he do to receive it?
Okay, he was 16 years old when he joined the Pennsylvania Reserves at the age of 16, like they said.
Wow.
This regiment fought in 9 battles the next year, 62. On September 17th, Samuel was in the Battle of Antietam. That was one of the bloodiest one-day battles in the Civil War. His regiment was on the north end of the 24-acre cornfield where most of the fighting was done. The 1st Texas Regiment, 1st Texas Brigade was moving through the cornfield. The 1st Texas Regiment got out ahead of everybody. So it was all out there by a kind of rogue, and it was fired on by a whole brigade, and just basically wiped out. That volley killed or wounded all the color bearers, and the flags dropped to the ground. This is when the 17-year-old Samuel Johnson ran out into the corn and picked up the flags. Without the flags to align on and rally around, the Texas Regiment could not advance because the flags were going through the corn was over their head, and they kept their alignment by watching the flags.
Wow.
And now that without the flags, they couldn't keep alignment, so they probably wouldn't have advanced anyway because about 80% of them were either killed or wounded. But anyway, he returned the flags to the line, but on doing that, he got a very serious wound before he made it back to his lines. He spent 9 months in a hospital, and on returning, when he was on his discharge, he was awarded the Medal of Honor and promoted to second lieutenant.
Wow, what a phenomenal story.
And he's buried in the Little Baker Cemetery out here in West Fork.
Wow.
So, and since he spent so much time as an orderly in that when he was in the latter part of his life, he was a little country doctor out there. He was their doctor.
Wow.
In the Country Doctor Museum out in Lincoln?
Yeah, I've checked, they have no record of it.
That's too bad.
And he didn't know where he was out here.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now,
When
this may
we-
be my ignorance, Joe, but how did he get from Arkansas all the way out to Maryland and Antietam?
Well, he was from Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Okay, he was from
I-
Pennsylvania.
and I-
He
okay,
came
I
out
forgot
here
that.
after the
Okay.
war.
Yeah.
Oh, now I'm following you. Okay.
Okay.
I just wasn't
Yeah,
following you.
yeah, he came out here after the war.
There's a little monument to him in his hometown.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. You can see that there, but that's his headstone. Yeah. He's, as far as we know, he's the only Medal of Honor buried in Washington County.
And that's what I'm saying, I think Clarence Craft is buried in the National Cemetery, he's a Medal of Honor winner.
As far as I know,
Isn't he?
there isn't any Medal of Honor winner buried in, because I'm
I'm pretty sure Clarence Craft won the Medal of Honor.
I've asked,
Will you guys do that check on that?
yeah, because I'm with the Cemetery Association, and on Memorial Day, we fire the cannon to open and close it. And I'm familiar with
At
the,
our National Cemetery?
yeah.
The craft is right there, when you come in, it's just right over to the side of the right. So you could check really fast, but I just was sure he was a Medal of Honor, well, that's why they.
I asked
Post
Antone,
office had-
who's the director there.
Yeah.
I asked him if there was any Medal
And
of
he said
Honors, and he said, no, there's not.
I think it's to the right of where the flagpole is.
Yeah. He's over,
Right
not
when
even
you
that
walk
far
up, right off the road.
Yeah, it's right there.
I think there is one there.
That's him, that's Clarence Craft.
Is this here?
Yeah, that's him. Isn't he a Medal of Honor winner?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's him.
There you
He
go.
is- He is
Hey,
Medal of
we're gonna
Honor.
resurrect something.
And he's,
He passed
Oh.
in 2002.
There you go. There you go.
There was a
He's
big
World
name, John.
War II, is that right?
he is, yeah, you're
Yeah,
right,
there you
yeah.
go.
I
Cool.
put a wreath on him.
Yes, we got another Medal of Honor guy.
I met him a long time.
By the way, also at the National Cemetery, is Captain Charles von Berg, who's an interesting character, came in there with the Iowa companies, and became a scout. He knew Cody and those guys. He stayed here in Fayetteville.
Uh-huh.
He retired
I
here.
don't know where.
And
I
every
don't know
evening
where
at
he's
6
buried.
p.m. he would blow taps.
But he
lived
was
up on
living in
Mount West, East Mountain, then Mount Sequoia.
Wow. Wow.
We gotta close it. Before I'm gonna shut down.
Hi, Joe.
Hey, thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it.
Good job.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you.
I got a question.
It's good to see you guys.
I really appreciate you coming. Thank you so
Well,
much.
I barely made it. I was late getting here.
April 5th.